Hello there. Today I'm taking a look at an Australian wine, and I've been given this little tiny bottle. It's an 187 milliliter bottle, so a quarter bottle, probably a 2-glass serving of Jamshed Shiraz. The wine has no vintage on it, and I was given this by the winesearcher team of wine specialists from our London office. Evidently they'd seen a YouTuber, Tom Gilbey, doing a review of this, and they wanted to know what I'd make of it. I did try and find Tom's review, but I've not been able to. So anyway, what is Jamshed? Turns out that evidently in 1895, the first wines that were produced by the Leasingham winery, and Leasingham is one of the famous old wineries of the Clare Valley in South Australia, came from their winery that had been set up in the old Clare Valley jam factory. And thus there is actually a Leasingham brand seen, I think, mostly in the Australian market called Jamshed. And I suppose it's utilising that brand, it's recognising its legacy. Now the Jamshed brand as we know it here was actually founded in 2017, and it was founded by the Accolade Wine Group. And Accolade are a group of primarily Australian wine producers, but actually of New World wine producers, that in 2025 purchased the wine interests of Pernod Ricard, and the merger of those two entities has gone on to be called Vinarchy. So essentially it's a brand from Vinarchy. Vinarchy actually still own and produce the Leasingham brand, but I would note that this isn't made as a Clare Valley wine, it's simply labelled as being from southeastern Australia, and this particular bottle actually isn't even given a vintage, but we'll have a look at that in a minute as well. So as I say, Vinarchy, a group formed in 2025. They have quite a large number of brands, largest amongst which would be Jacob's Creek, but also Berri Estates, Orlando, St Hugo, Burge, Petaluma, Hardy's, Tintara, Katnook, Bay of Fires from Tasmania, and from New Zealand you've got brands such as Church Road, Mudhouse, Stoneleigh and Brancott. But the group has interests elsewhere as well. I noticed the Jamshed brand has wines in it from Spain and from Argentina. So we see a Tempranillo from Spain and Malbec from Argentina. And one of the group's principal brands is Campo Viejo, the Rioja producer. But I think as far as Jamshed is concerned, you need to go to Berri Estates, what was known as the Berri Romano Cooperative, which is in fact the largest producer in South Australia. They make somewhere in the region of 1/3 of South Australia's total wine output. Their production facility between Berri and Glossop takes fruit from the various producing regions of the Murray-Darling Basin, and they have the ability to crush there somewhere in the region of 220,000 tonnes worth of grapes a year, and that equates to over 100 million litres of wine being made here annually. This is the largest wine producing facility in the Southern Hemisphere. So why am I concentrating on Berri Estates as the likely source for Jamshed? Well, simply that this region, the fruit supply from the Murray-Darling Basin, is the area of Australia where fruit will be cheapest. And labelling a wine as southeastern Australia, which is a geographical indication, is completely above board and quite normal in the production of Australian wines. But it's generally talking about a large, sometimes single varietal, blended wine produced at a price point from fruit from irrigated flatland vineyards that are easily worked mechanically, be machine harvested, then irrigated from the Murray-Darling Basin in an area where it's warm and naturally quite dry, so you've got low disease risks, and good availability of irrigation water means you can get reasonable crops year on year. So am I expecting this to be a fine wine? Well, not really. And although I've not been able to watch it again, I did see Tom Gilbey's review of Jamshed, and I don't think he was particularly in favour of it. He's not a big fan of bulk brands, and he's entitled to that opinion. But I think if we're going to review Jamshed, I think we have to review it on the basis of whether it reaches its brand aims or not. And the stated brand aims for Jamshed are actually, they're a little bit iconoclastic. They have the aim of making life less complicated. Their stated aims are that wine is too complicated. And actually what they want to do is make a wine that just tastes good. That it's simple, punchy, gluggable, nothing audacious, nothing too serious. So we should be assessing this wine on, is it delicious, is it smooth, and is it gluggable? I think it's meeting these aims, and it's priced reasonably, but I think it's wrong to dismiss the brand out of hand. So what else do we know about the wine? I was interested to note that if you read the back label, it says it's bottled in Weighbridge in the UK. So the wine will have been transported in bulk, probably in large flexi tanks fitted inside shipping containers, and there's then been bottled at a facility there. And that actually makes sense. I mean, it's expensive to ship the bottle and the sealed wine in this format, and you can probably get it to reach the UK in better condition, shipping in bulk and then bottling there. And that would also suggest to me that this brand is primarily for the UK market. Now the wine isn't vintaged. However, I do notice there's a lot number on the back, and the lot is L4116. Now, I was slightly worried to begin with that ended in 16, because sometimes these lot numbers are dates, and if this was a wine from 2016, I'd certainly be worried about the condition of it. However, the brand wasn't started until 2017, so that makes it unlikely. In fact, I think the date is working the other way around. I think the 4 probably suggests that this was bottled at least in 2024, 11/6, so either the 11th of June or the 6th of November. And then there's a bottling time as well here. It says 0913 at the bottom there. Now, although there's no vintage on the bottle, I assume this is likely to be a single vintage wine. I don't think they're going to have blended vintages. If they're bottling in 2024, I would imagine they're probably bottling the 2023. It wouldn't be impossible for a Southern Hemisphere wine that it was the 2024 wine that was being bottled. But I also notice that there's none of the 2024 vintage of this wine available in larger bottles on the market. I think it's probably safe to say this is likely to be the 2023. Other things I picked up from the label is the fact they talk about hints of vanilla and spice, and that makes me think that there's going to be some sort of effort to give some sort of oak aging influence, and there's probably not aging in barrel. It's more likely that oak staves have been put either into the fermenting vessels or into the wine as it aged. So I should think the fermenting vessels, where the oak character is going to be picked up more readily. As I say, the wine I think is trying to be slightly iconoclastic. They did suggest that the best way to drink this would be in a jam jar. I'm afraid I wasn't going to try that. They suggest you can drink it lightly chilled. I haven't done that either. For wine pairing, that it would go great with pizza. And they also talk about perhaps mixing it with ginger beer to make an enjoyable longer drink. So this is not really a wine where they're looking to talk about the wine's history, the influence of the soil or the climate or the character on making it. It's something that's aimed to be a reliable drinking, gluggable wine at a price point. So let's remember that. Is it delicious? Is it smooth? Is it gluggable? So let's have a look at it. Starting out, the colour has a reasonable depth. It's a sort of a black purple with ruby notes at the rim. It's medium to deep. Swelling it, the wine has 13.5% alcohol according to its label, and it's very readily clinging to the glass and it's forming some tears. So I'm expecting a reasonable amount of body there. So let's see what we make of the aromas, shall we? Now actually there's a reasonable sort of amount of Syrah-like character there. There is some red fruit, but actually that's being dominated by a sort of a more earthy, meaty note, and perhaps hints of spice. Almost as if there's a little of the notes of the pedicel, the woody part of the grape bunch has been left in the ferment. So let's have a taste, shall we? On the palate, the first thing I notice is a certain amount of sweetness. They do specifically suggest that the wine is slightly off-dry, but actually that really is quite a sort of a jammy sweetness. So in some ways it's doing what it says, not on the tin but on the wine label, and that's counterpointing some of those spicy notes that seem to be coming actually from wood. I was a little tentative about suggesting that the pedicels have perhaps been left in the wine during fermentation. That would be something you tend to do with Pinot Noir. But there almost is a note, sort of quite gripping, certainly a note of bitterness in the tannin there. Perhaps I was being more sympathetic, I'd say there was a licoriciness. But actually there's a sort of a slight harshness that's making it stand out and making it a little bit more mouth-watering. The acidity seems balanced. The alcohol perhaps is adding a little bit of warmth. It's perhaps adding a little to some earthy notes on the mid-palate. The wine is medium to full-bodied, so it's fulfilling its aims in that point of view. There is a degree of fruitiness. There is some quite obvious sort of spicy raspberry note coming through on that, as I say, mouth-watering beginning there. Again, if I'm being more charitable, maybe some of that mouth-watering fruit could be interpreted as mulberries, but in general I would say that was more raspberry jam. Those flavours are lasting quite nicely, and the spice notes are actually settling down on the finish fairly well. There's almost a touch of chocolatiness there. So what do I think about wine? I think its sweetness came as a bit of a surprise to me. However, I do think there are consumers yet less used to drinking red wine that would actually find that very attractive. It certainly stops those tannins that cut in fairly quickly from being too harsh. There is some Syrah character, there's that sort of reduced note on the nose, meatiness and some spice. There's an amount of body, there aren't harsh tannins. I would certainly say that it's gluggable. Is it smooth? More sweet than smooth. I think actually smoothness needs to be a bit more textural than that. And I think that's where there's a little bit of dissonance on the mid-palate almost. If I had to score this, I'm probably scoring this as an 86, maybe an 87. I certainly don't find it a fruity wine. I don't think it's something that I'd reject if it was served somewhere. However, I don't think ideally I'd want to go back for a second glass of it either. I do, however, think that it's a pretty reasonable stab at making a wine that's good value for money. I would imagine the brand is quite consistent from year to year, and I think given their limited aims, it's quite drinkable. It would go with pizza. Maybe slightly chilling it might take some of the harshness out of that mid-palate. I think it's a pretty decent branded wine that if you lighted on it, you might buy a couple of times, but I'd hope that you'd aspire to something more, and maybe after a while decide that you'd move on for something a bit more exciting with a bit more concentration, a bit more complexity. So yes, thank you so much for joining us for the tasting. I do hope you found it of interest. I certainly have. If you've enjoyed the video, do please press the like button. That would be fantastic. We'd really appreciate your support. Better still, if you'd like to watch more of these videos, do subscribe to my channel. Sign up. Make sure that you have an alert set so that you can be notified every time I publish a new tasting, and then you won't miss anything. If you've got any friends who think might like to know more about Australian Shiraz or any of the other wines we're looking at, do please pass it on to them. We'd really appreciate your endorsement in that way. If you've got any comments, please pop them in the comments box below. I'd love to know what you think about Australian wines and any of the other wines we're looking at. So thank you again for joining us, and I do hope you'll make some time and come and join me for another tasting in the very near future. Until then, bye for now.